Hey YouTube, welcome back to Arcane Armory. Today we're talking about ballistic coefficient. What is it? Who cares? Why does it matter? I know a lot of folks aren't going to watch this video to the end, so before you leave, we're going to refinish our 1903 Springfield. If you haven't seen that series yet, click on over to that when you're done with this. We're going to refinish this rifle, and I want to hear what you guys think about what finish we should use on it. I was thinking a hand-rubbed oil finish, but we could do a sand-in finish. I'm kind of leaning away from spray-ons, but let me know what you think we should do with this rifle and make it look nice. And whatever finish gets the most comments, that's what we'll do on this rifle. So this is going to be a little bit more of a boring just talking episode, but the reason we want to go over our ballistics coefficient is because we need to understand what performance we want to get out of our rifle, and that'll help us decide what scope rings to put on it. If you don't know how ballistics and scope rings are related, we're going to do a video on maximum point blank range pretty soon, and that'll explain that whole concept. So what is a ballistic coefficient, or BC? Well, to put it simply, BC is a numerical way of expressing the aerodynamic resistance that a certain bullet has. Certain bullets are more aerodynamically efficient than other bullets, and that has to do with their shape and what their intended action was. For instance, lever guns typically use a round nose bullet so that they don't detonate the primers in the bullet in front of them in the magazine tube. Bolt action rifles allowed for the use of spire point or pointy bullets, which fly much better. And so ballistic coefficient was developed as a way for us to measure the difference between bullet designs. So based on that number, we can see substantial performance differences between two different bullet designs and use that number as a comparison. So when we want to reload or we're shopping for ammo, we can look at our ballistic coefficient number, or our BC, and determine which one we think will give us better performance. We cannot strictly base our bullet choice off of BC because the highest BC bullets are target bullets that simply wouldn't be suitable for hunting, and our best hunting bullets oftentimes have a lower BC, so we don't quite get the long-range performance out of them if we were to use them in a target range. What we're going to do is we're going to compare 4 different bullets in 4 different scenarios to see how much of a difference ballistic coefficient actually makes. A couple of qualifiers: all of the bullets compared are going to be 150 grain. They will be different diameters, but they'll all be 150 grain, and the first 3 contestants are going to be leaving the barrel at the same 2,800 feet per second. So we have the same bullet weight moving at the same velocity, so everything at the muzzle will be even. Our 4th competitor will be slightly different in that it is fired from a smaller cartridge, being a 6.5 Creedmoor, and because of the reduced powder capacity, it will leave the barrel at 2,650 feet per second. So let's not get caught up in all the bogged down numbers right now. I'll put them up on the screen so we can go through them, and we'll go from there. So ballistic coefficients are almost always described as a decimal, but some of the 50 caliber bullets with 50 BMG projectiles can be over 1. But for most small caliber arms, something you can shoot with your shoulder, it is usually expressed as a decimal. So one other thing to note about aerodynamic performance: aerodynamics is exponential. So if you double the speed of an object through the wind, it has 4 times the aerodynamic resistance. Conversely, if you increase the speed of the wind by double, it has 4 times the power. So the faster a bullet goes, the more important its aerodynamic profile is, and the bigger the differences will be between 2 bullets. This is why in pistol bullets, ballistic coefficient is almost never discussed, because they're almost all subsonic or very close to, and because of those low speeds, the aerodynamic resistance forces are so much lower that they're almost not a factor unless you're shooting extremely long ranges, and that's not really how pistols are typically used. So we don't have to worry about BC for pistols. It's mostly for rifles and mostly for longer range applications. All of these rifles are also going to be zeroed at 100 yards. So we won't have any drop comparison at 100 yards. So one other thing that we're going to use to compare these 2 rounds is the 1,000 foot-pound standard, which means most state regulatory bodies consider 1,000 foot-pounds of energy the ethical minimum for taking a whitetail. So we will compare the ranges that could be achieved with each of these bullets and see what the differences are. So back to our first example is a 30-06 Spear 150 grain round nose, a ballistic coefficient of 0.255. As soon as we fire this bullet, it starts immediately slowing down because of aerodynamic drag. So at 100 yards, We left the muzzle at 2,800 feet per second. At 100 yards, we arrive at the target at 2,450 feet per second with 2,000 foot-pounds of energy. So we'll go through our other contestants real quick. We'll see how they stack up at zero range. Now, if we wanted to improve our performance just marginally, we could switch to a different type of bullet, much like this Spire Point boat tail. Now, you're not going to be able to really see it there, but this is a boat tail round. That bullet has a ballistic coefficient of 0.417, so quite a bit higher than our round nose. Again, leaving the muzzle at 2,800 feet per second. It reaches our 100-yard target at 2,583 feet per second and 222 foot-pounds of energy. So we've gained over 200 foot-pounds of energy by simply using a different shape of bullet. So, if we want to get a little bit more exotic than just changing our bullet, we can switch down to a 270 Winchester, which is a derivative case of the 30-06, has roughly the same propellant capacity, and it'll push our 150 grain bullet just as easily at 2,800 feet per second. So, because as a bullet gets narrower, in order to keep the same weight, it has to get longer. Longer bullets are typically more efficient. So our 150 grain bullet out of the 270 Winchester arrives at our target, at our zero range target at 2,617 feet per second. So we've lost less than 200 feet per second, and it is exerting 2,281 foot-pounds of energy on that target. So we've gained almost 50 foot-pounds almost 60 foot-pounds of energy over our 30 caliber bullet. Now we want to push the envelope just a little bit. We're going to go down to a 6.5 caliber bullet, a 26 caliber bullet, 6.5 Creedmoor. This has a reduced powder capacity because it's so much smaller and can only get 2,650 feet per second out of our bullet to begin with. So up front, it's not really a fair comparison, so let's see how it stacks up. So this bullet out of the little 6.5 Creedmoor, which has a greatly reduced powder capacity, is going to reach our zero range target at 2,526 feet per second and 2,125 foot-pounds of energy. So it's an improvement over our 30 cal round nose, but it's still kind of behind the 270. Let's see how that carries on further down the road. We're going to skip out now to 500 yards and see what the real differences are at the longer ranges. So our baseline bullet, the 30 caliber round nose, is going to reach a 500 yard target at 1,335 feet per second and 593 foot-pounds of energy. So it's lost 2,000 foot-pounds of energy and 1,300 feet per second on its way to that target. Now if we bump up to our boat tail round, it's going to reach our 500 yard target with 814 feet per second and 1,096 foot-pounds of energy. So according to our 1,000 foot-pound rule, the boat tail round still has enough energy to ethically kill a whitetail at 500 yards, where our round nose has not. Now the 270, once again we're necking it down, but staying with our 150 grains, it reaches our 500 yard target at 1,954 feet per second, so it's lost only 850 feet per second over 500 yards, and reaches the target with 1,272 foot-pounds of energy. So we've still got a little threshold there. We could say 500 yards is well within our ethical deer killing range. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, is our 6.5 Creedmoor, with its very long 150 grain bullet, reaches our target at 2,063 feet per second. It is now the fastest bullet on our list at 500 yards. And it reaches the target with 1,418 foot-pounds of energy. So it is 150 foot-pounds of energy more than our 270 and reached the target over 100 feet per second faster. So our little cartridge that had a 150 foot per second disadvantage with leaving the muzzle has now surpassed what was our fastest cartridge. Now let's introduce a little wrinkle into our equation. Let's take our 6.5 Creedmoor bullet and say hypothetically that it could leave the muzzle at the same velocity as the other two cartridges at 2,800 feet per second. That would put its zero range at 2,672 feet per second with 2,378 foot-pounds of energy, which is a substantial improvement even over the 270. Our 500 range target, it gets a little bit wild from there, and that means our 500 range target gets impacted with 1,600 foot-pounds of energy at 2,194 feet per second, which is an increase of over 120 foot-pounds of energy more than the 270, which so far was nearly our most efficient cartridge. Now, please keep in mind, all of these comparisons are not cartridge comparisons. We're not comparing 30-06 to 270 to 6.5 Creedmoor. I only put the cartridge names in there just so we have a little bit of context about what the powder capacities were and how realistic the charges and velocities are. What we're really looking at is a weight and velocity of bullet and how it suffers throughout the aerodynamic range based on its design. Now that we know that all of our bullets are leaving the muzzle at the same speed with the same weight, and so they have the same starting energy, what is the maximum ethical range for whitetail with each of these cartridges? Well, for our round nose, it's only about 325 yards, which, depending on your context and the terrain you live in, that could be plenty. Where I live, we have lots of open fields, and the 800-yard shot is not entirely out of the question. Whether you should take that shot or not is for another topic, but we just want to see if we have the ability to do so. Now, our 150 grain boat tail out of the 30-06 has a maximum ethical range of 550 yards. So we've gained 225 yards with the shape of the bullet. Our 270, because we were able to elongate that bullet even more with the smaller diameter, that has stretched that range out to 650 yards. So we have a substantial improvement over the round nose now. And our 6.5 Creedmoor, even though it started off slower and has a major disadvantage in muzzle velocity, reached 825 yards, still maintaining that 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. Now our Wildcat guy, with the 2,800 feet per second departure, was able to stretch that range to 925 yards. So, with the same bullet weight, with the same muzzle velocity, there is a 600-yard difference in ethical hunting range between a round-nosed bullet and a smaller diameter, longer, more efficient bullet. So that is a significant gain and something to be considered when choosing the best caliber for your hunting purposes. Now, this is not to say that we couldn't find a more efficient load for our 30 caliber bullets, whether it be a 308 or a 30-06 or what other cartridges have you. This is just to compare the same bullet weights. Yes, we could bump up our 30 caliber bullets to a 200 grain or 225 or 220 grain, and we'll see much higher ballistic coefficients with those as well. But I wanted to keep the variables to a minimum, so we keep the same weight, we keep the same velocities, and simply change the BC, and see what the ballistics calculator shows us for a difference. So this just goes to show that caliber and cartridge choice are not everything when it comes to hunting range. Ballistics coefficient has very much to do with that. So if you guys like this kind of stuff, click the like and subscribe button. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't already, go on over and check out the refurb of our M1903 Springfield that we're doing to try and bring that rifle back to life.